how do you find homeowners that are willing to offer owner financing on the property that they're selling you, right? You see all these crazy things, right? Like people buying properties at 2% interest rates for 30 years or 0% seller finance, like I've talked about before. Like, how do you actually land these deals? Because people are doing it all the time. So what's the difference between maybe those people versus where you might be trying to get your first one? Like, how do you get to that point, right? I want to share my personal experience and some of the things that I've learned doing this for the last 4 years full time, doing over 100 creative deals, and ultimately like some of the mistakes that I've made along the way. So first thing is, I think the question, what's the type of list that you use to find seller financing opportunities, is a good question, but I think it's incomplete. And here's why. It's incomplete because you're trying to shortcut it by doing that, right? You're trying to ask, like, what's the secret sauce? What's the secret software that I can use to find the right numbers and skip trace and find all these people? And we're skipping the whole point, which is, how do I learn to be the type of person that develops the skills that can navigate the conversation around creative finance effectively so that I can now land these deals and help more sellers? How do I do that, right? Because if you don't learn how to do that, the right list is never going to solve your problem, right? Because you don't know how to navigate the conversation. You don't know how to help a homeowner feel comfortable even talking about this. And you don't even know how to explain it, right? Which is where I was at, right? I'll share my first deal that I ever bought. First house, I was looking to buy primary residence. I went to a bank. They said, hey, we're not going to give you a loan because you wrote everything off on your taxes the year prior. And so I was stuck. But I wanted to own a home, right? I wanted home ownership, but I had no idea how to do it. So I started learning about this thing called creative finance. And I'm like, wow, maybe I could own a home if a seller would, for some reason, be willing to be my bank, right? And so what ended up happening was I started spending money on direct mail, got in touch with the seller. And when I spoke to the seller, the house is probably worth around $300,000. He wanted roughly $200,000 for the house. My cash offer was like $175,000. That's all I knew at the time, was just to make cash offers. And what ended up happening was he said, man, I just don't want to do that. Well, I said, well, how much were you wanting? He said, well, I really want 200. And I said, okay, well, in my mind, I'm thinking, I just learned about this thing called seller financing like literally a week prior to this appointment. I'm like, let me just ask him if he'll do it, which is not the way I would recommend doing it. I didn't know what I didn't know, right? But I just asked him, I said, hey, if I could get you $200,000, would you be willing to seller finance me? And I'm like cringing in the corner, you know, I'm like, please. And he goes, I don't really want to do all that. Just shut down immediately, right? Well, and I said, okay, that's fine. We definitely don't have to do that, but like, can you help me understand why? And he said, well, maybe I just don't understand what you mean. And it was a quick realization for me. I'm like, oh, this guy doesn't know what I'm talking about. So I said, let me just kind of break it up in like simpler terms. So like, how much cash do you feel like you need now to pay off your credit cards that you talked about and, you know, be able to fix the driveway at your house? He said, well, I need at least 40,000. So 40,000 is what you need for that. Yes. Okay, cool. That leaves us with $160,000. For me to get you your price, I need you to give me some kind of terms, right? Like, what if I pay you for that $160,000 over time in payments? Because I asked him, I said, what are you going to do with the money? And he goes, well, I'm just going to put it into an annuity. That's just what I know. I said, how much does the annuity, pay you? He said, well, it pays me 2%. And I said, and by the way, this is beautiful, literally a property that we just picked up right over here in this area, right next to a river, and I'm considering moving here. Anyways, so, he said, hey, 2%. And I said, well, what if I took that 160, instead of you taking it and putting it into an annuity and making 2%, what if I just paid you 2.5% on it? And we kind of measured the difference, and it was a difference in like $100 more a month for him. But he liked it. He said, that sounds good to me. And he said, how long would it be? I go, well, most mortgages are 30 years. And he goes, okay, that works for me. And that's how I got my first seller finance deal. Now, why did that work? Because I understood, what does he want to do with the money? How can I make it more advantageous for him, not just a win for me? And ultimately, like, why would this guy do this in the first place? I asked him that. I said, why do you feel like ultimately this would be a better fit than maybe taking a lower cash offer? He goes, well, I really want my price, right? It was still a good price for me at the time. But he goes, also, if I'm honest with you, Evan, I grew up learning that you should never have big lump sums of money because I don't want to spend it all, which was super interesting for me because like I don't think that way. I tend to think like, you know, I want to be responsible with my money and we'll put it into different buckets, but not everyone thinks the same way as you. And so as you start learning more about creative finance and more about seller financing and sub two, you're going to start realizing that these conversations require more in-depth understanding of the seller, their problems, but also like their beliefs about money, all this kind of stuff. And so I want to share this just to tell you like and encourage you that it's not about a magic list. If somebody, I can promise you this right now, if somebody is willing to sell their house to a wholesaler at 60, 70 cents on the dollar, they're probably willing to sell it on creative terms if you just learn how to ask the right questions and talk about creative finance in a way that's not super scary, because it doesn't have to be. It's a relational thing, right? And so if you want to learn more about how to navigate these types of conversations, how to maybe get your first seller financing deal, you know, maybe get something at 0% for 30 years, like wouldn't that be life-changing? If you want to learn more about that, I have a free community that I run. There's no sales pitch. It's just people actively trying to do deals together, raising money, selling creative deals. You can even find some creative deals in the group. So if you want to learn more about creative finance, we have a weekly call. I'd love to see you in the community. If you found this video helpful at all, or at least some insight on seller financing, what you should actually be focusing on, and why creative finance can change your life, leave a like, leave a comment. Talk to you soon.